We welcome in Bryan Munson. We just talked to him on Thursday regarding the All-America Bowl down in San Antonio. Nebraska had 3 players playing in that game. Bryan, long time no chat. When you look at that game down in San Antonio, let's start on the offensive line with Brix and Pyle playing for Nebraska. What do you make? What have you been hearing about how those two guys performed?
Yep. First of all, Happy New Year.
Indeed.
I think that everything was very positive about those two guys. So let's start with Pyle, the highest rated of the two. It was a much different type of game and setting to anything he'd ever played in before. He's usually been hat on a hat, kind of just straight drive blocking, road grading people, and never any type of, zone blocking or moving laterally. He's always just been able to leverage, his physicality and getting people off of the line of scrimmage. Pyle, on the other hand, is a little bit more technically, ready to kind of play the college game based on the offensive system that he ran down there in Houston. He's also a guy that's swung in from playing tackle up to this year, moved into guard, so he's got into a tighter, he's in a little bit more of a phone booth now, working interior offensive line versus being out there on that island against those faster guys. He's against bigger, slower, but stronger guys, in the phone booth. And I think he's really actually excelled when it comes to that. One of the things that, people said very quickly about Pyle was that, the rankings weren't really reflective of his ability. Number one, he was a little bit underrated. Number two, kind of was considered to be the best puller, like on the West squad. So a guy that technically had learned and knew how to do it. But then Brix, he'll tell you, like, I've never had to move laterally. And then you would sit there and say, well, how are you able to kind of so gracefully do that and cover that up? And I think he was assimilating, all the information and having to apply it almost like real time. And I think that, by being so agile and so athletic, it kind of covered up this, what it could have been like a really cumbersome process for somebody that wasn't as athletic as what Brix might have been, and that could have gone down there and said, I have no idea how to do this, and got frustrated with it. That was not Brix style. Brix was just plugging through it, and he was doing all that stuff kind of real time. So lots of really good compliments about those two all the way around this week. And obviously, as indicative of the game on Saturday, they really like to run behind those guys. So when, they had that long kind of road grading drive that I think went right to left, those guys were in the entire drive, and they ran right over the top of them.
Did I see both guys playing interior? Do you think that would be the playing at Nebraska, or those, tackle guys, or could they be, swing guard tackles?
In talking to Pyle is, I think, getting way more chatter from Coach Raiola and the Nebraska staff about playing inside. They're also mentioning to him that, if he could learn how to, or demonstrate that he can snap, that would be beneficial to him, that he could play center and guard. And then I think for Brix, it's going to be mainly like, look, they have a lot of high hope for him. And I think that they want to, they know that he's going to be able to soak it up. They think that physically, he's going to be very, very ready to kind of come in and be productive. It's going to be really a matter of like, what position can you get him on the field the soonest? Because I think that's going to matter, So I think with Pyle, I think people are going to underestimate how ready he is. And I think with Brix, it's really one of those things where when the opportunity presents itself, he just needs to be ready to kind of walk through the door, and whether it's guard or tackle, just be ready to play.
And that attitude you mentioned from down at the All-America Bowl seems like it'll serve him well in the college ranks. Similar thing for Carter Nelson, right? A guy playing 8-man football up in Ainsworth. Is, I don't say first taste, but his first major taste of big boy football, playing against a lot of the best players on the East squad there. Carter Nelson had that nice catch and run. How do you assess his performance down in San Antonio?
I don't think in a world of geese, he was kind of a duck, right? Where they got him down there, and he got put into this bucket of being tight end. And in reality, he's not a tight end at all. He had never been asked to block, before going down to San Antonio. So everything that he did blocking wise in his life, in his high school career, he learned how to do in San Antonio. And he was, again, kind of Bricks-esque. He was able to kind of pick that stuff up, got some really good coaching and some really good direction on how to kind of do all that stuff, and was able to apply it very, very quickly. But he was a guy that, when they were going one-on-ones and doing a little bit of skelly, he wasn't getting any reps because they didn't know like how athletic of a dude, he really was. And I think, both Carter and Betancourt, who is the Clemson commitment from Illinois, the two tight ends on the west side, I think that they could have been featured a little bit differently in the offense, and probably would have really given them some serious advantages. I just don't think that they really knew kind of what they were dealing with. So I think that, and look, Carter smiled it off. He's got that opinion, like the experience was bigger than, him becoming MVP. It wasn't anything like that. His expectations were he was going in eyes wide open. He wanted to meet some people. He wanted to have an incredible process, and he wanted to learn some things. He wanted to kind of get his teeth cut, a little bit, before he heads to Lincoln in June, to kind of get things going. So I just don't feel like that there was an offense put in place really to kind of feature any of the tight ends on the West squad. But when he did get a chance to shine, both on Saturday and in the practice that I saw him on Wednesday morning, he was the only guy on Wednesday morning that even caught a pass, and it was for a touchdown. So he did the best with the small moments, the small amount of moments that he had.
Which is all you can ask. We're talking with Bryan Munson of Husker Online here on our Allo VIP line. A guy that didn't play in the game, but was at the Combine down at the All-American Bowl. You wrote about Bryan for Husker Online. Connor Booth out of Wahoo Bishop Neumann. What do you make of Connor Booth's performance at the Combine, not in the game? Is he a guy that you think could carve out a role for Nebraska, or is he just an in-state guy that's one of the best guys in state, so they felt like they should take him?
No, I think his performance on Friday was eye-opening on a national level. He didn't run a 40. He's been dealing with a little bit of a hip quad kind of injury. He was encouraged not to run by the coaches that were there at San Antonio. He did all the other drills. He did standing broad. He did vertical jump. He did all the ball drills, all those things. And from all accounts, he compared very, very, very well. In fact, I met a high school coach who helps out with the National Combine on Wednesday, and he wrote me specifically about Connor on Saturday and said the kid really stood out. So I think Connor is one of those great hidden gems that Nebraska, has tucked away in Wahoo, Nebraska, number one. I think that he's never going to get the recognition on a national scale because of where he's at geographically. I think he's going to be a terrific college player, both in baseball and in football. I think you just kind of get that gritty kind of thing talking to him, that he's just, he understands what this opportunity is worth. So I think that he's excited for the challenge. But I think that on a national scale, that he had a chance really to kind of open some folks' eyes that had doubted him about playing the running back position, that had doubted that he was capable of being a guy that could stand up nationally to other players from other, more populated areas. He did a great job on all accounts.
He committed to Nebraska as a running back in next year's class. You think he's a running back? He thinks he's a running back. The staff thinks he's a running back for the Cornhuskers?
I absolutely do. I mean, this is a guy that's averaging over 10 yards a carry. He had a monster junior year after a good sophomore season that really saw him play, primarily as a fullback. He moved back to feature back finally as a junior when the offense changed. I'm really excited to see what he can do his senior year. He ran, in the 4.5s last summer for Nebraska, which kind of got him the offer. He's a 6'2", 250-poundish, running back that's got a capability, here to put on a few more pounds, but like, having known his father and I know kind of like what his structure is, and that's about what you can kind of expect, about 220 pounds or so. But I think athletically, I just don't think people really understand, how athletically gifted, Connor is. So I think that's the part there that's really going to catch people's attention when they go out there and they watch him play his senior year, or go watch him play baseball this summer, or get a chance, here in the future to see him, carrying the rock for Nebraska. I think that there's a lot of things to really look forward to him as a running back.
He's got one more season of high school to go, but Nebraska does bring in a running back commit, not in a true 2024 commit, but a transfer portal guy in Dante Dowdle. And they also bring in Isaiah Nayor, a Texas high school product, went to Wyoming, then back to Texas for a couple years. What do you make of those two portal ads and what they say about this Nebraska offense in 2024, Bryan?
Critical. I mean, Dowdle is needed to backfill the hole that was created by Kewan Lacey jumping out of the class. The room, and it's just my view of it, I still think it's a pretty thin room. I mean, it really could have still used a 2024 guy and a portal guy when you return like basically your top two guys, from season-ending injuries. And you get Ives and you have Emmett Johnson there. And then people, I think, are kind of overlooking Emmett Johnson, but he had a great impact this last season. It'll be interesting to see what he does kind of taking a step forward. And Nayor is super interesting because of what he did at Wyoming prior to going to Austin, and then, putting the knee injury behind him and not having basically a role, that was too prominent down there in Austin, getting lost in the Sarkisian, becoming the head coach, and COVID and all that other stuff that kind of goes along with it. I think Nebraska found themselves, with a really good number one option finally in the room, a young receiver room that can help the rest of those guys kind of, take another step and really kind of come of age. And he's going to have a great chance to lead a very talented room.
I want to ask you about this too, Bryan. It's entirely speculative at this point, but the rumors have been coming out of the coaches convention that Matt Rule was speaking at, that Nebraska's in some talks with Dana Holgorsen for a potential role on staff. If that comes to pass, I would assume he would be the quarterback's coach and take over as offensive coordinator. What do you think Nebraska's looking for in, talking to Dana Holgorsen? If he does come to Nebraska, what would he bring?
I think he would be a splash hire. I mean, if Matt Rule and Nebraska are committed to bringing in a proven quarterbacks coach, to bringing in, somebody that's going to give them some different looks and play calling, and Holgorsen and what he's done, his offensive mind and the quarterbacks, of course, that he has worked with, the guys that he has helped, mentor and coach. I think that Nebraska fans should be really excited about that. I think the other side of it is too, and people aren't really talking about this, but he's a heck of a recruiter. And I think what he had kind of set up at Houston is in the NIL area in particular is very, very interesting, because he was getting players away from P5 programs to go to U of H, because the NIL system, the NIL program that was in place was some of the best that they had in the nation. So he was able to kind of get this program that's there, under the radar a little bit, non P5, in a competitive situation with the P5 schools. So I think that has a lot of interesting potential, particularly when it comes to being quarterback and the competitive advantages of bringing another recruiter in on the staff with Texas ties to boot. Definitely has a lot of interesting things to go along with it.
Again, it's just speculative at this point, but obviously the Texas connections stand out, right? I mean, you look at his time at Texas Tech, you look at Graham Harrell, Michael Crabtree at Tech, you look at his work with Kevin Sumlin, you look at what he did at U of H, like you're saying. But going under the radar, Bryan, is his connections to Iowa, right? He's a Davenport, Iowa guy who cut his teeth under Hal Mumme and Mike Leach, right? So I think we think air raid when we think Dana Holgorsen, we think Hal Mumme, but Dana Holgorsen's still a Midwestern guy, and I have a hard time imagining that he'd look at Dante Dowdle and Emmett Johnson and say, those guys don't need the ball.
Well, I think the Midwest stuff is the Midwest, coming from the Midwest and being from that area are critical. I think it's one of those things that Nebraska is always going to be very, very interested in keeping all of the guys in the region home. And if you get a guy like Holgerson to come to Lincoln, you can put him in a room and you can put him into a high school that are in the neighboring states, and he is recognizable the minute that his feet, walk through the door. So I think that there's just so many things from, what he sees in guys offensively and what they can do for you on the football field to, the recognizability of his own personal brand and just knowing who he is and what he could do. And then putting him on, a team like Nebraska in the Midwest that's really, trying to get to that next step, and bringing in a guy like Raiola, and they're really pushing hard now on trying to put year 3 class together and really, just kind of fill in the last kind of holes in the roster. So it's definitely it's a really fascinating story.
And then last but not least, Bryan, your Bills, they did it not just in the playoffs, they're AFC East champs. Their reward a date with Pittsburgh. How are you feeling about the 2-7 matchup and the Bills' chances in these NFL playoffs?
We did everything we could to give it away last night.
But you didn't.
Josh really came around in the fourth quarter, and I thought that one play where it was 4th down and he had 5 yards to go and he ends up getting the first down to kind of seal the deal really was terrific. But I love the matchup, in Buffalo against Pittsburgh a whole heck of a lot better than going back to Miami trying to beat those guys for a third time. Who knows what you get next week? Is Mostert back? Is Waddle back? So they were definitely down a guy or two last night. It was very, very clear. So I'd rather play twice in Buffalo than have to go beat Miami back in Miami again next week. So huge win for Buffalo. I actually like the way the seeding kind of breaks down a little bit for them. So yeah, getting those first 2 games at home are very, very helpful. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Bryan, twice in 5 days. We appreciate you making time for us. It's always a treat. Have a good rest of your week, my friend.
All right. Be good.